Hello, truth seekers and champions of the unheard. Today we're diving deep into a story that starts with a simple meal, a father's love, and a quiet shift that echoed into a thunderous battle for justice. Settle in because this isn't just about a missing lunch. It's about the unseen battles fought in plain sight, and the powerful truth that can emerge when one person dares to listen. Our story unfolds in the heart of a vibrant community in a modest but meticulously kept home that smelled on any given morning of freshly brewed coffee and promise. This was the sanctuary of Marcus Thorne and his son Julian. Marcus, a man whose hands built dreams. Literally, he was a master carpenter, his calloused palms telling tales of dedication. Understood that a strong foundation wasn't just for houses, it was for lives. And for Julian, that foundation began every morning right there in their kitchen. Marcus wasn't just a father. He was a craftsman of care. Every single weekday before the first bus rumbled down their street, Marcus would embark on his morning ritual crafting Julian's lunch. It wasn't just food. It was a carefully curated package of love, a silent blessing tucked into a bright blue lunchbox. He'd layer thick-cut, turkey-crisp lettuce and a slice of sharp cheddar between two slices of whole wheat bread, ensuring the perfect balance. Alongside, there'd be a perfectly ripe apple, a handful of crunchy carrot sticks, and as Julian's favorite surprise, a small homemade chocolate chip cookie. Still warm from the oven. Even the juice box was placed just so snug against the ice pack. This was Marcus's daily declaration. You are nourished. You are cared for. You are loved. He prided himself on making sure his son never ever knew the pangs of hunger during a long school day, understanding deeply that a child's growth body, mind, and spirit depended on it. Yet lately, something felt off. It started subtly a ripple in the calm waters of their routine. Every evening, when Julian burst through the front door, his first destination wasn't the living room for cartoons or his bedroom for homework. It was the kitchen. And it wasn't just the normal after-school rummaging for a snack. No, this was different. Julian would rush to the refrigerator, his eyes wide, almost frantic, tearing into whatever he could find. Last night's leftovers, a bag of chips, anything. Devouring it with a kind of desperate, almost primal hunger that made Marcus's stomach clench. At first, Marcus, ever the optimist, brushed it off. Must be a growth spurt, he'd tell himself, watching Julian wolf down a sandwich and then reach for a banana. All that running around in school. Maybe the school activities were just making him hungrier than usual. This is a trap many of us fall into, isn't it? We see the surface, the immediate explanation, and we hope for the best. We want to believe that everything is fine, that our loved ones are safe, that the world isn't as complicated or cruel as it can be. It's a natural human instinct to normalize, to seek comfort in the familiar. But after several days, then a week of watching his son return home not just hungry, but truly starving. A silent, unsettling hunger that etched worry lines onto Julian's young face. Marcus couldn't ignore it any longer. This wasn't a phase. This was a pattern. A peculiar, unsettling pattern that began to gnaw at his peace of mind. He'd ask Julian gently, "Hey buddy, how was lunch today?" Julian would just nod, mumbled, "Yeah, I ate." Or, just, "I get hungry fast, I guess." There was always a slight hesitation, a subtle shift in Julian's gaze, a quiet evasion that Marcus, with his carpenter's eye for detail, couldn't unsee. This is where the first crucial lesson emerges, isn't it? As parents, as guardians, as friends, as human beings who care for each other, we often miss the quiet shifts. We miss the subtle changes in routine, the hesitant answers, the desperate hunger that isn't just about food, but about something far deeper. Sometimes the loudest screams are hidden in the quietest changes. And sometimes the most profound problems begin with an empty lunchbox. Marcus knew deep in his gut that something was profoundly wrong. And that feeling, that unsettling observation, would soon drive him to uncover a truth far more chilling than he could ever imagine. The quiet shift was about to become a very loud alarm. The evasiveness in Julian's eyes, the way he'd subtly shrink when Marcus brought up lunch. It was a tiny tremor beneath the surface, but for Marcus, it was enough. He was a man who worked with his hands, yes, but also with his mind. He didn't just see, he observed. He didn't just hear, he listened to the silence between the words. And that silence around Julian's lunch. It was deafening. One particular morning, Marcus decided he wouldn't just prepare Julian's lunch. He would imprint every detail into his memory. He stacked 2 perfectly made turkey and cheddar sandwiches side by side, nestled a crisp green apple in the corner, and laid a homemade oatmeal raisin cookie on top just so. He even noted the exact placement of the juice box, how it fit snugly into its compartment. This wasn't about distrust. It was about gathering data. It was about building a case piece by meticulous piece, because Marcus knew instinctively that if something was wrong, the truth would be hidden in the details. He kissed Julian goodbye, a pang of anxiety already starting to form in his stomach, a stark contrast to the perfectly prepared meal he'd packed. The moment Julian walked through the door that evening, Marcus was waiting. Not in an accusatory way, but with a quiet intensity. Julian, true to form, made a beeline for the kitchen, and that's when Marcus made his move. He didn't ask about lunch. He just said, "Hey Julian, can you hand me your lunchbox? I'll wash it for you." A simple request, a daily chore. Julian hesitated for a fraction of a second, just long enough for Marcus to catch it. Then with a shrug, he handed it over. Marcus took the lunchbox, his heart hammering in his chest. He unzipped it slowly, his eyes scanning every inch, every compartment, his mind replaying the mental snapshot he'd taken that morning. And that's when it hit him. Not with a shout, but with a terrifying absolute silence. The lunchbox was empty. Completely. Utterly. Empty. Not just mostly empty. Not a half-eaten sandwich. Not a single apple core. Not a crumb. Not even a stray raisin from the cookie. It was as if the contents had vanished into thin air. There was no trace that food had ever been in there. No evidence that it had been eaten, not a single sign of human consumption. A chill ran down Marcus's spine. A cold dread that eclipsed any hunger Julian could ever express. This wasn't just a growth spurt. This wasn't Julian being picky. This was something else. Something sinister. His mind raced a torrent of frantic possibilities. Was his son giving his food away? Losing it somewhere on the playground? Throwing it out, perhaps, to avoid eating something he didn't like? Each thought was a cold knot in his gut. But then a darker, more terrifying possibility clawed its way to the surface, making Marcus's jaw tighten. Was someone taking it from him? The idea, so unthinkable, so cruel, sent a tremor of pure, unadulterated rage through him. This moment, this discovery of the utterly impossibly empty lunchbox, was the true turning point. It wasn't just a physical void. It was a gaping hole in Marcus's understanding of his son's school day. It was the moment his protective instincts roared to life, a primal call to arms. You see, this is where many of us might stumble. We might jump to conclusions, accusing our child of being wasteful or scolding them for losing their lunch. But Marcus, with his deep understanding of Julian's nature, knew better. He knew his son. Julian was responsible. He cherished his treats. The idea that he'd simply throw away a perfectly good, lovingly prepared meal was utterly illogical. And that logic, cold and hard, pointed to something far more troubling. Marcus understood that pushing Julian further, demanding answers he clearly wasn't ready or able to give, would only make him retreat further into himself. It wouldn't help. It would only deepen the fear, the shame, or whatever hidden burden his son was carrying. No, Marcus knew he had to find the truth himself. He had to become a detective, silent and relentless for the sake of his child. Because sometimes when our loved ones are unable to speak, it's our job to become their voice. And Marcus Thorne, the quiet carpenter, was about to start building a case that would expose a darkness lurking in the most unexpected of places. The empty box was just the first piece of the puzzle, and the next piece would lead him straight to the school gates. The empty lunchbox haunted Marcus. It was a silent accusation, a chilling void where warmth and nourishment should have been. He knew with an unshakable certainty that he couldn't confront Julian directly. His son's guarded silence was a clear signal. Something was deeply wrong, and forcing the issue would only make Julian retreat further into fear. No, Marcus had to step into the lion's den himself. He had to go to the heart of the mystery Julian's school. Walking through the sunlit corridors of Northwood Elementary, Marcus initially felt a wave of reassurance. The vibrant artwork on the walls, the cheerful buzz of classrooms, the familiar scent of disinfectant and crayons. It all painted a picture of a safe, structured, and nurturing environment. This was where Julian spent his days learning and growing. It felt right. It felt secure. He was greeted by Principal Eleanor Vance, a woman with a kind smile and an air of quiet efficiency. She listened patiently as Marcus explained his concerns, her brow furrowing slightly, but her words were calm and professional. "Mr. Thorne, we take all matters of student well-being very seriously. We haven't had any reports of Michael being bullied or having issues with his lunch." Marcus understood. A school like any large institution relied on reported issues, but his gut, that primal instinct that had kicked in with the empty lunchbox, told him this was more insidious than a playground scuffle. He knew he needed to go deeper. With Principal Vance's permission, he began to speak with Julian's classmates during recess, observing them as they played casually, asking about their lunch routines. That's when the whispers started. "Julian doesn't bring lunch to school." One little girl, shy but earnest, mumbled, avoiding eye contact. Another boy, kicking at a pebble, added hesitantly, "Yeah, I think I saw him throw something away once. Like he had a lunchbox, but then it was gone." The pieces began to click, forming a horrifying picture. It wasn't that Julian didn't have lunch. It was that he wasn't eating it. And the fact that his friends believed he didn't bring one, that meant he was hiding it. Hiding the fact that he was bringing food, and hiding the fact that it was disappearing. This was a critical twist. This wasn't just about theft. It was about manipulation, about instilling a fear so profound that a child would rather be hungry than reveal the truth. The fear wasn't just of losing the lunch. It was of something else entirely. Marcus felt a cold knot form in his stomach. But just as despair threatened to set in, a new lead emerged, a beacon in the confusing fog. He spoke with Mrs. Anya Sharma, Julian's homeroom teacher. Mrs. Sharma was known for her warmth and her keen observation skills. As Marcus explained his suspicions, Mrs. Sharma's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. "You know," she began, her voice soft, "Michael does act nervous around one of the teachers. It's subtle, but I've noticed it. Mr. Silas Croft, the new math teacher. He has a different way of handling students. Some of them seem a little uncomfortable around him." Mr. Silas Croft. The name hung in the air, heavy with a new, unsettling significance. A different way of handling students, uncomfortable. Marcus's mind immediately connected the dots: the missing lunches, Julian's evasiveness, and now this specific teacher. It was a breakthrough, a vital clue. But it also brought a wave of icy dread. Could a teacher, someone entrusted with the care and education of children, really be involved in something so insidious? This moment highlights a crucial lesson about institutions, particularly schools. We often assume that because someone is in a position of authority, especially over children, they are inherently trustworthy. We assume the system will catch any wrongdoing. But this story reveals the cracks. It shows how subtle forms of intimidation and manipulation can go unnoticed, especially when the victims are young and vulnerable. It reminds us that no reports doesn't always mean no problem. Sometimes the most damaging issues are the ones that never make it to the official record because they are hidden behind layers of fear and silence. Marcus felt a surge of anger, but also a renewed sense of purpose. He had a name. He had a target. The investigation had just taken a very personal turn, and his next stop would be a confrontation that would either confirm his worst fears or clear the air. But something told him deep down that the air would only get thicker before it cleared. The whispers in the halls had finally given him a direction, and he was about to walk straight into the heart of the darkness. The name hung in the air: Mr. Silas Croft. Marcus had spent enough time around people to recognize a certain type. The smooth talker, the charmer, with an underlying current of something unsettling. Mrs. Sharma's quiet observation about Mr. Croft's different way with students, coupled with Julian's hidden hunger, solidified Marcus's suspicions. This wasn't just a hunch anymore, it was a target. His first instinct, the primal roar of a protective father, was to storm directly into Mr. Croft's classroom to demand answers to unleash the fury that had been building inside him since he'd stared into that impossibly empty lunchbox. His hands clenched at his sides. But Marcus Thorne was a man of logic, a builder. He knew that an uncontrolled explosion would solve nothing. It would likely just scare Julian further, give Mr. Croft an easy out, and leave Marcus with no real proof. He forced himself to stay calm, to breathe, to remember that this wasn't about his anger. It was about Julian's safety and uncovering the truth. Jumping to conclusions, acting on raw emotion, wouldn't help Julian. He needed a strategy, a plan. Marcus sought out Mr. Croft in the staff lounge, choosing a neutral territory. Mr. Croft looked exactly as Mrs. Sharma had described, late 30s, tall and lean, with neatly combed blonde hair and a clean-shaven face that seemed almost too perfect. His expression was neutral, almost friendly, as he offered a polite, "Mr. Thorne, what can I do for you?" But there was something about his demeanor, a subtle, too-controlled calmness, that immediately put Marcus on edge. It was like looking at a perfectly polished surface that hid a vast, dark depth. Marcus, keeping his voice even, explained his concerns about Julian's missing lunches and his son's strange behavior. He watched Mr. Croft's face closely, searching for any flicker of surprise, concern, or even guilt. But there was none. Mr. Croft's responses were too careful, too rehearsed. "Oh, really, Michael? That's quite unusual," he'd say, a faint, almost dismissive smile playing on his lips. "I haven't noticed anything out of the ordinary. Perhaps he's just going through a growth spurt or trading his food with friends." He spoke with an air of detached professionalism, not the genuine concern of a teacher hearing a student might be struggling. He even managed to imply subtly that Marcus might be overreacting. Sometimes parents worry a little too much, you know. Children can be very resourceful. Marcus's frustration mounted. He could practically feel the wall of denial Mr. Croft was building around himself. This man wasn't just deflecting. He was actively shutting down any possibility of wrongdoing. Marcus left the conversation feeling colder than before, the suspicion turning into a stark certainty. He immediately went back to Principal Vance's office, recounting the chilling interaction. "He didn't even seem remotely concerned when I told him about Julian's missing lunches." Marcus stated, his voice tight with barely suppressed anger. If he were innocent, wouldn't he have at least acted surprised or offered to help look into it? Principal Vance, though clearly sympathetic, still seemed constrained. "Mr. Thorne, I understand your concern, and I certainly find Mr. Croft's reaction puzzling. However, our school, like any institution, has protocols. We cannot take disciplinary action or even launch a formal investigation without concrete proof. Just a parent's suspicion or a child's vague discomfort isn't enough." This is where the cold, hard reality of institutional bureaucracy crashes into the fierce protective love of a parent. Principal Vance wasn't malicious. She was simply bound by rules, by legal precedents, by the need for evidence. And that's a common infuriating truth many of us face when trying to seek justice within established systems. Whether it's a workplace, a government agency, or a school, the burden of proof often falls on the victim or the advocate. It's a system designed to protect against false accusations, but it can also inadvertently shield the guilty, forcing the wronged to become their own investigators. It highlights a painful truth: sometimes the very mechanisms designed to ensure fairness can become roadblocks to justice. Marcus felt a profound sense of helplessness, quickly replaced by a surge of unyielding resolve. "Proof," he thought, his jaw setting. "You want proof? Then I'll give you proof." He walked out of Principal Vance's office, not with despair, but with a hardening determination. If the system wouldn't move without undeniable evidence, then he would bring them evidence they couldn't possibly ignore. The wall of denial had only strengthened his resolve. He knew exactly what he had to do next, a daring, risky step that would either expose the truth or leave him back at square one. And the clock was ticking, with Julian still coming home hungry. The words of Principal Vance echoed in Marcus's ears, without concrete proof. That wall of denial, that bureaucratic shield, had only ignited a fiercer fire within him. He wasn't just a father. He was a problem solver, a builder. And when a structure was flawed, you didn't just walk away. You found a way to shore it up, or if necessary, tear it down and rebuild it right. Hours stretched into a blur. Marcus sat at his kitchen table, usually a place of laughter and meals, now a battlefield map. He researched, he read, he scoured online forums. He knew he couldn't place a camera. That would be too obvious, too easily detected. But sound was different. A tiny device, easily hidden, could capture the truth that Julian was too afraid to speak. He found exactly what he needed, a miniature voice recorder no bigger than a quarter with a battery life long enough for a full school day. It was a long shot, a desperate measure, but it was his only option. The next morning was a symphony of suppressed anxiety. Marcus moved with a quiet intensity, his heart thudding against his ribs. As Julian got ready for school, Marcus approached him not with a hug or a playful nudge, but with a casual request. "Hey buddy, grab your backpack. I just want to make sure you've got everything." With practiced sleight of hand, as Julian slung the bag over his shoulder, Marcus subtly slipped the tiny recorder into a small zippered pocket nestled deep within the main compartment just under a textbook. It was a fleeting movement unnoticed by Julian, but to Marcus it felt like the weight of the world had just shifted. The moment Julian walked out the door, the silence in the house became deafening. The day passed agonizingly slow for Marcus. Every tick of the clock was a hammer blow against his nerves. He found himself pacing, checking his watch every few minutes, his mind replaying the countless ways this could go wrong. What if the battery died? What if Julian found it? What if there was nothing on it? The fear of finding nothing was almost as strong as the fear of finding something truly terrible. This wasn't just about vindication. It was about Julian, about the truth, and about the gnawing certainty that his son was suffering in silence. When Julian finally returned home, Marcus feigned casualness, but his hands trembled slightly as he took the backpack. He waited until Julian was distracted, then retreated to his workshop, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He plugged the tiny device into his laptop, his fingers almost fumbling with the controls. The speakers crackled. Then, a faint sound, the ambient murmur of a classroom distant, chatter the rustle of papers. And then, "Give it to me." Marcus froze. His blood ran cold. The voice wasn't loud, not angry, not aggressive. It was firm, almost dispassionate. A voice that had clearly been trained to command obedience. And then he heard the unmistakable chilling sound of Julian's small, hesitant voice. Can I at least keep the apple?" Julian's voice was barely a whisper, laced with a fear that tore at Marcus's soul. And then the voice again, closer, clearer. "Eat it quickly. And don't tell anyone." It was Mr. Silas Croft. The name that had been a suspicion, then a target, was now undeniable. Marcus's pulse hammered in his ears, a roaring symphony of rage and heartbreak. It wasn't just that his son's lunch was being taken. It was the chilling command, the quiet intimidation, the insidious manipulation designed to keep a child silent and afraid. This wasn't theft. It was a calculated act of control, a psychological torment inflicted by someone in power. This was the plot twist. He hadn't wanted the one that confirmed his deepest fears. It wasn't about playground bullies or lost sandwiches. It was about an adult, a supposed educator systematically preying on a child's vulnerability, twisting their sense of right and wrong and trapping them in a web of fear. This is the horror of unseen abuse, the silent suffering inflicted by those who exploit positions of trust. And it's why in our own lives we must never dismiss those quiet signs, those subtle shifts in behavior, because they often conceal the most profound wounds. Marcus sat there listening to the recording again and again, each playback a fresh wave of agony and fury. But then a new emotion began to simmer, a cold, hard resolve. He had the proof, undeniable, unforgettable, and now he knew exactly what he had to do. The time for whispering was over. It was time for a confrontation that would shake the very foundations of Northwood Elementary. The unseen witness had done its job, and now its testimony would bring a hidden darkness into the unforgiving light. The recording felt heavy in Marcus's hand, a small device holding the monstrous truth. The quiet intimidation, the chilling command, "Eat it quickly, and don't tell anyone." It echoed in his mind, confirming his worst fears about Mr. Silas Croft. But more importantly, it confirmed Julian's suffering. His son forced to hide his fear, forced to believe he was somehow at fault, living in a silent prison of hunger and anxiety. Marcus found Julian in his room drawing quietly. He approached his son not with the anger that coursed through his veins, but with an overwhelming tenderness. He knelt down, meeting Julian's eyes, which still held that faint flicker of guardedness. "Julian," Marcus began, his voice soft, steady. "I know what's been happening with your lunch." Julian's eyes widened, then filled with tears. The dam broke. All the pent-up fear, the confusion, the shame spilled out in a torrent of sobs. He said it was a rule, Dad," Julian choked out between gasps. "He said if I told anyone I'd get in trouble, that it was bad to not share, and he watched me, every day." Marcus pulled Julian into a tight embrace, holding him, letting him know with every fiber of his being that he was safe. "You did nothing wrong, Julian," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "This is not your fault. Not one bit. And I promise you with everything I have, I'm going to fix it. No one is going to hurt you like this ever again." In that moment, the recording, the principal's protocols, the meticulous investigation all faded. All that mattered was Julian safe, and finally, speaking his truth. Armed with Julian's tearful confession and the undeniable audio proof, Marcus was no longer a concerned parent. He was an unstoppable force. He didn't call Principal Vance. He walked straight back into her office, his stride purposeful, his eyes blazing with a righteous fire she couldn't ignore. This time, there was no request, no polite inquiry. There was a demand. "Principal Vance," Marcus stated, his voice low, but vibrating with conviction. "My son has been suffering under that man's control. You told me you couldn't do anything without proof. Well, here it is." He placed the small recorder on her desk, the cold metal a stark contrast to the boiling emotions in the room. "Listen to it, every word, and then tell me what you're going to do about it." Principal Vance's face paled as she listened, her composure slowly crumbling. Marcus watched unwavering as the casual classroom sounds on the recording gave way to Mr. Croft's chilling, controlled voice. Then, Julian's tiny, terrified whisper. The undeniable truth echoed through the office. Mr. Croft was summoned. He entered the office with his usual calm, almost smug demeanor, his perfect smile in place. But the moment his eyes landed on Marcus, and then on the recorder on Principal Vance's desk, a flicker of something fear recognition crossed his face. He tried to deny it, his voice wavering. This is being taken out of context. This is a misunderstanding." But it was too late. Principal Vance, her face now set with grim determination, cut him off. "Mr. Croft," she said, her voice sharp with authority. "The evidence is undeniable. Effective immediately, you are suspended pending a full investigation. This behavior is unacceptable, and we will be reporting this to the authorities and seeking your immediate termination." The relief was instantaneous, palpable. Not just for Marcus, but for the entire community. Mr. Croft was officially suspended, and within days, his resignation under pressure was confirmed. He was gone, his dark shadow lifted from Northwood Elementary. But the battle won was just the beginning of the healing. That night, as they sat at the dinner table, Marcus watched Julian with a renewed sense of peace. For weeks, Julian had pushed his food around his plate, eating just enough to avoid questions, his eyes still holding that distant, wary look. But tonight, it was different. Julian ate with gusto, with a freedom Marcus hadn't seen in far too long. He ate like a kid who wasn't afraid of going hungry, a kid who knew he was safe. Later that evening, as Marcus sat on the couch lost in a book, he felt a small presence settle beside him. He glanced down to see Julian leaning against his side, his small body relaxed, unburdened. "Hey, buddy," Marcus said, closing his book, wrapping an arm around his son's shoulders. "Everything okay?" Julian hesitated for a moment, then looked up, his eyes clear and bright. "Yeah, Dad," he said, and then with a simple, heartfelt sincerity that brought tears to Marcus's eyes. "Thanks, Dad. That thanks, Dad, wasn't just for the lunch or for the fight. It was for listening, for seeing the unseen, for being brave enough to challenge a system, to face down a manipulator, and to break the silence." This story isn't just about a father's love for his son. It's a powerful reminder that every one of us has the capacity to be an advocate, to fight for those who cannot fight for themselves. It shows us that true strength isn't just in physical prowess, but in unwavering determination, in meticulous investigation, and in the courage to speak truth to power. For those who have ever felt unheard, exploited, or dismissed, remember Julian. Remember Marcus. Your voice, your instincts, your fight for justice matter. You are not alone, and your silence can be broken.